Now, why is it that we believe that this situation is not in Israel's interest? First, it fuels a Middle East arms race and an economic loss for Israel. So estimates that have come out show that for every $1 in military aid that goes to Egypt, that Egypt receives, Israel must spend between $1.60 and $2.14 to maintain the qualitative military edge. That is the same ratio of military strength. Now, since Israel receives $1.50 for each dollar that Egypt receives, that is $1.50 in aid, in military aid, that means that it's a net loss in economic terms to Israel. Israel needs to spend between 10 cents and 64 cents out of its own treasury to maintain the military balance as is. So a corollary to that is, in the absence of aid, there would be less arms in the Middle East, if you like, and more disposable resources or disposable income for Israel. The second reason that we believe that it's not a pro-Israel policy is that it hurts the Israeli defense industry, causing an economic loss for Israel. So there's a requirement in U.S. aid to Israel that 73.7% of that aid must be spent on U.S. equipment. So that translates into less military expenditures of the IDF in Israel itself, that is for the domestic Israeli defense industries. So as an example, for example, the Galil rifle as opposed to the M16, it's thought that that domestically produced, Israeli-produced rifle is more appropriate and is less expensive for Israel, yet because of the requirement to spend some of that money, the majority of that money, in the United States, that is not purchased to the same extent it would be if there was no aid and Israel had to fund its own defense expenditures, and that causes quite a big loss to the Israeli defense industries. Now, when the IDF does not use Israeli defense equipment, what happens is that they also lose contracts with other countries to export that weaponry. So there's another loss to the defense industry. It turns out that the use by the IDF of Israeli-made products is a stamp of approval and something that is desirable and is something that is marketable. So the Israeli defense industries lose contracts for that reason. There are some other issues. For example, direct offsets. Often when a country purchases weaponry from the United States, there's a type of rebate. Often a direct offset is transferring a production line for that equipment to the country itself. But Israel does not get that same amount of direct offsets from the purchases of American equipment, given that it's being funded by aid. There are also some questions about the aid limiting competition. That is, the U.S. is competing with Israel in several markets for exporting weapons, and the aid puts some extra pressure on Israel to not go through with several contracts. So the bottom line here is that there's a loss to the Israeli defense industries, and it's been estimated that this could reach nearly $3 billion a year. Third, as Ian mentioned, foreign aid in general, we know, there's plenty of evidence, tends to block pro-market reforms. And this is also true in Israel, we believe, that if Israel had to replace the $3.1 billion a year by itself, which it totals between 18 and 22% of its defense budget, then Israel would likely have to implement some efficiency measures to be able to fund that amount of money by itself. Now, it's interesting to note that Israel would not have to raise the full $3.1 billion. As I mentioned, there would be lower total defense expenditures due to the purchase of cheaper equipment in Israel or from other countries, and there would also be an overall demilitarization without aid to the Middle East as a whole. There would also be more tax revenues from increased employment and corporate profits from the defense industries, from these increased domestic arms purchases, offsets, and also export contracts. And the last thing to note is the gas discoveries that were recently found in the Mediterranean off the Israeli coast in Israeli territorial waters is projected to bring in $140 billion in government revenues over the next 30 years, which amounts to approximately $4.67 billion a year in government revenues. So you could see that that clearly could offset the loss of 3.1 billion. So what are our policy recommendations? What do we think should be done? Well, we believe that, of course, aid, U.S. aid, should be cut to the Middle East entirely, not just Israel. I should emphasize that. And what Israel could do, what the U.S. and Israel could do, is to negotiate a gradual reduction in that military aid in return for increased co-funded activity. So now there's plenty of joint research and development, especially on missile defense, that's going on at the moment between the U.S. and Israel, and that should continue. This is 50% funded by Israel and 50% funded by the U.S. So that's a good model to continue with. So there could be a gradual reduction over time in the aid component in return, one can say, for an increase in contracts with the U.S. For co-funded R&D. Now, there's a model for this negotiated reduction. This actually took place with the reduction in economic aid to Israel and an increase in military aid that started in 1998. There was a $120 million reduction per year starting in 1998 in military aid, in economic aid, sorry, and an increase of $60 million per year in military aid. So there was a net decrease of $60 million per year until it reached zero in 2008. So what we could do is aim to reduce the military aid component now through fiscal year 2019, when the agreement, the new agreement that was signed in 2008 with the Bush administration expires. So there could be a reduction, gradual reduction, as I mentioned, in the military aid, and an increase in the co-funded activity until that time. And the second aspect of that is, of course, that the economic and military aid to all Arab countries should be reduced at an equivalent pace. So as the amount is reduced over time to Israel, the amount should be reduced at the same 3-to-2 ratio to Arab countries as a whole as well. So there's it's sort of well understood that there's a 3-to-2 ratio between Israel and the Arab countries in aid. So this is similar to when the net $60 million loss to Israel since 1998 was accompanied by a $40 million reduction in aid to Egypt, maintaining that 3-to-2 ratio. So there's a model for what we're recommending. Now, we also believe that there should be a voluntary negotiated solution, and this should be much preferred over forced cuts. Forced cuts did happen in the past. In fiscal year 1986, following the Gramm-Rudman-Hollings Act, or the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985, there was a 4.3% reduction in foreign aid accounts across the board. So it has happened. There is a precedent for this. And now, according to the Budget Control Act of 2011, we might have an 8.5% decrease or cut to all foreign aid accounts in fiscal year 2013. However, there is a possible exemption for Israel. Aid to Israel can be legally exempted in this act, and we believe that should happen, but in return for a negotiated solution through fiscal year 2019. This would, as I suggested, now this would send a signal to the world that the cut to Israel is, through a negotiated solution, means that this U.S.-Israel bond remains unbreakable. Finally, I'd like to just mention that all of this is relevant only to Israel's foreign military financing. That is the FMF component of U.S. aid. We wouldn't suggest touching the other forms of aid that exist. There are no great problems with that. For example, the U.S. loan guarantees to Israel, which is also a type of co-funded activity, and also the emergency U.S. weapons stockpile that is also worth about $1 billion a year in Israel. And that is a type of aid that we don't suggest touching. It's really just a component, which is the conditional aid of the where 73.7% has to be spent on American equipment.